China is moving rapidly on both offensive and defensive systems. China's talking about building a state network of 13,000 satellites. On a scale that's just completely outside of what Russia is attempting to do. China is investing a lot more money, and it's moving much faster right now to put new systems in space. And those systems are both going to threaten United States satellites and also have a kind of a surveillance that would almost rival the United States.
So I want to understand where the U.S. sits in all of this, because when it comes to space, it feels like the thing that would make the U.S. military so anxious about a rival's advancements in space is if we couldn't match them or we couldn't properly respond to them. So what is the U.S. readiness right now to basically match or fight back against whatever Russia and China are doing in space?
Everyone I talk to from the Pentagon and also former Pentagon officials all agree that the United States maintains clear dominance in space. It has more satellites for surveillance and missile targeting and missile defense than any other nation. Both the United States and China have moved in a really rapid way into a new domain, and that is low Earth orbit. That's about no greater than 1,200 miles off the surface of the Earth, and it's the area where SpaceX has put more than 5,000 satellites for its Starlink system. That's the focus right now, is to flood that zone with lots of relatively cheap, quickly manufactured, easy to replace satellite systems. And the United States wants to put, at least 1,000 satellites into low Earth orbit for its military purposes in the next several years. Among the many concerns that the American military has is that China is moving so rapidly right now to build out its own system that unless the United States really accelerates what it's doing, that soon China could be close to matching what the U.S. has in space. And that China now has enough surveillance capacity in space to target American military capacity in any type of a conflict. Imagine, the scenario where China decides to invade Taiwan and the United States decides that it's going to help defend Taiwan. If all of our military assets are immediately visible to China, they could be targeted even before they got to the Taiwan Straits, or even before they got within range to have a military engagement. And simultaneously, China's offensive space weapons were disabling American satellites so that the United States could no longer communicate. That's the fear that the military has right now, is both of those things could suddenly happen if the United States is not building up its own space capacity and its space weapons to disable Chinese satellites.
God, so the worry, and it's very specific, is that if China can achieve the same level of military prowess in space as the U.S., then the U.S. loses any power it has to deter China from doing something like invade Taiwan, because we know, and they know that we know, that they can basically shut down our systems before and during that invasion and make it impossible for us to stop them.
It would severely degrade military capacity if they could wipe out a good share of our satellites, and they're racing to try to avoid that.
So Eric, what does it look like for the U.S. to race to avoid China meeting America's capabilities where they currently are? How does the U.S. military do that? Obviously, it would need to either slow China down, or the U.S. itself would need to speed up and race ahead of China.
There's two primary things that are happening right now. One is to build out U.S. offensive systems to disable Chinese or Russian satellites. So that includes jamming systems. They just signed a new contract to build new devices that could jam Chinese or Russian satellites and disrupt their signals. Laser systems that could destroy satellites from the ground or from space. And also other systems that just like the Chinese that built a tug in space, the United States potentially is going to build its own systems that could grab and disable other satellites in space. The second piece of this plank is to build out a massive investment in space capacity by the United States to build a whole new architecture in low Earth orbit with hundreds, if not more than 1,000 satellites that will be so many, so redundant, that you couldn't effectively disable the United States military capacity, because even if you were to shoot out a certain number of them, there would be yet more of them. Sort of like Starlink right now, the SpaceX Starlink. If it loses a certain number of its 5,800 satellites, they just switch and they rebuild the network among the remaining satellites. Basically, everyone knows that the next time there's a major war with a major power, that there's going to be offensive activity in space, and both sides are preparing for that.
Wow. I mean, what you're clearly describing is a new space race. A space race that's about which of these three global superpowers can take out the other's satellites and use their satellites offensively and defensively to achieve military supremacy.
Yeah, that's right. I think that there's a new space race that's underway right now, and it is more intense than at any time since really the 1960s, when the United States and Russia were testing weapons in space for the first time. And it is very intense, and the increase in spending on space right now radically exceeds anything that the Navy or the traditional Air Force or the Army is doing. More dollars are pouring into space defense right now as a percentage increase. It's more than any other part of the military.
Eric, this makes me wonder how much the U.S., in its efforts to do those two things you just described out in space, is ultimately reliant on contractors, the private sector, and in particular Elon Musk, right? This guy who has put so many satellites up in the sky, but who's mercurial and unique, to put it diplomatically. So is the U.S. plan for staying ahead of both Russia and China to ultimately put more and more power in the hands of Elon Musk?
Right now, there's no question that SpaceX and Elon Musk plays an extraordinarily dominant role in the ability to launch to orbit, and the military is excessively reliant on SpaceX. So at this moment, it's an uncomfortable kind of domination by SpaceX. Of the 9,400 objects in orbit right now, 5,235 of them are SpaceX Starlink satellites. So almost all of the satellites in orbit from any nation in the world are Elon Musk. But the Department of Defense realizes that it can't be so reliant upon one company for launch. And so the Pentagon is also signing contracts with small launch companies to quickly be able to put military satellites into space with just a few days' notice.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of money that's being spent to build out this capacity.
Right. So what you're really saying is that this new space race is going to come with and foster a new space military industrial complex that's going to be the recipient of many billions, maybe trillions of dollars in taxpayer money.
That's right. I mean, the United States is already in the middle of an incredible explosion in the commercial space industry, because the number of commercial launches is growing at a really crazy rate. And in the entire world right now, there are approximately 10,000 objects in orbit. And within the next 10 years, the expectation is going to be something like 25,000 satellites in orbit. So there's a huge boom right now in the space industry globally.
So, Eric, when I step back, it feels like the inevitable outcome of this new space race, this weapons space race, is a very potentially expensive version of what we already have, which is that famous concept of mutually assured destruction, right? It's this idea that all three of these countries have nuclear weapons and it keeps us all in check. Russia, China, the US. We don't attack each other directly because we all fear that the other country attacked would fire back in obliterating ways that would never make it worth it. And so isn't that kind of where we're headed with this battle over space? All three countries are going to be spending a tremendous amount of money eventually to reach some kind of loose parity that prevents us all from doing something really horrible to the other country.
I mean, I sort of reject your premise, and I think that, in fact, the thing that the United States is concerned about is it has had such a massive advantage in space for so long, and it's been so central to our global military supremacy. And suddenly, if you have another nation that's kind of walking in and becoming your rival in that environment, I mean, that's really worrisome to the American military, and they're determined to prevent China from matching the United States military capacity in space.
You're saying this is not about the three countries ever achieving parity. It's about the U.S. ensuring that parity is never achieved. Because if it's achieved, then everything changes.
Right. I think that basically the Pentagon wants to ensure that it can maintain dominance in space and not just parity, because space-based dominance is so vital to the way that the United States military has operated for years now.
Well, Eric, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back. Here's what else you need to know today. On Tuesday, President Biden summoned House and Senate leaders to the White House in an attempt to avoid the latest potential government shutdown. That shutdown, which could begin at midnight on Saturday, would be the result of strident demands from House Republicans who have attached right-wing policies to basic spending bills that have made them impossible to pass in the Senate.
We believe that we can get to agreement on these issues and prevent a government shutdown, and that's our first responsibility.
As he left the White House, Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson expressed optimism that a shutdown would be averted.
And we have been working in good faith around the clock every single day for months and weeks, and over the last several days, quite literally around the clock, to get that job done.
And in a rebuke to President Biden, more than 100,000 Democratic voters in Michigan cast protest ballots that declared themselves uncommitted to express disapproval of the president's handling of the war in Gaza. That number far exceeded the goal of 10,000 uncommitted ballots that activists had set for themselves and could spell trouble for Biden in the general election. Michigan is a key swing state where Biden defeated Donald Trump in 2020. Today's episode was produced by Michael Simon Johnson and Carlos Prieto, with help from Will Reed and Mooj Zadie. It was edited by Lexi Diao, contains original music by Marion Lozano, Dan Powell, and Pat McCusker, and was engineered by Alyssa Moxley. Our theme music is by Jim Runberg and Ben Landsberg of Wonderly. That's it for the Daily. I'm Michael Barbaro. See you tomorrow.
They are one of the largest recipients of NIH funding. Their scientists played a substantial role in developing over half the cancer drugs approved by the FDA in the last 5 years. Dana-Farber Cancer Institute has been making one advanced cancer discovery after another for over 75 years. To succeed against cancer, you have to be as relentless as cancer. At Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, what we do here changes lives everywhere. Find out more at danafarber.org/everywhere.
Walmart Plus members save on meeting up with friends. Save on having them over for dinner with free delivery with no hidden fees or markups. That's groceries, plus napkins, plus that vegetable chopper to make things a bit easier. Plus, members save on gas to go meet them in their neck of the woods. Plus, when you're ready for the ultimate sign of friendship, start a show together with your included Paramount Plus subscription. Walmart Plus members save on this plus so much more. Start a 30-day free trial at walmartplus.com. Paramount Plus Essential Plan only. Separate registration required. See Walmart Plus terms and conditions.
Here's your money briefing for Wednesday, February 28th. I'm J.R. Whalen for the Wall Street Journal. After their kids are grown and have moved out, the next big purchase for many empty nesters is a smaller home. But for some, a bigger home will do the trick.
They're healthier, and they're maintaining very active lifestyles, and that's oftentimes leading to a need for more space. Some older adults might still be working full or part-time, and they want a dedicated home office, so there goes one bedroom in the house for that. And maybe they want a home gym as well. I mean, we all got used to working out at home during the COVID lockdowns.
But upgrading to a larger house means careful financial planning. We'll talk to WSJ contributor Robin Friedman about that after the break.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. With over 122 million parts for your #1 ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply.
Being an empty nester doesn't necessarily mean it's time to downsize to a smaller house. Some are actually upsizing. Wall Street Journal contributor Robin Friedman joins me. Robin, this sounds counterintuitive. Why would somebody want to move to a larger house if in many cases it's just two people in their later years?
Lifestyles in retirement have changed due both to demographic trends and also to COVID, which has had an impact. Many people are retiring younger, or they're semi-retired, they're healthier, and they're maintaining very active lifestyles, and that's oftentimes leading to a need for more space. Some older adults might still be working full or part-time, and they want a dedicated home office, so there goes one bedroom in the house for that. And maybe they want a home gym as well. I mean, we all got used to working out at home during the COVID lockdowns. So many retirees enjoy entertaining as well, whether it's a weekly poker or mahjong game or by having family and friends over for extended visits. All of these factors create a need for more space, even for just two people.
You spoke to empty nesters who decided to move into a larger home. Why do they say they did that?
I interviewed a lovely retired couple who live in the Villages, which is, in case you've never heard of it, a huge 55-plus community in Central Florida. This couple had previously lived on a 300-acre farm, so they were accustomed to having lots of space and privacy. They initially purchased a smaller home in the Villages, but when a larger one became available on a cul-de-sac lot that offered lots of privacy, they jumped at the chance to buy it. And then they added 1,600 square feet to it. So the house is now 4,400 square feet for two people, with 3 bedrooms, 4 baths. It has a huge patio with a pool and a 1,200 square foot lanai. But they use all that space. They entertain frequently, and they use the outdoor space for entertaining.
Still, that's a lot of house for two people. And you spoke to a 63-year-old woman from San Diego who's upsizing, and it's just her. What went into her decision-making?
She's currently living in a 3-story townhouse, and she's finding it a little bit crowded for her current needs. She's using her den as an office, and she's squeezing her workouts into a tiny portion of her living room. So she's currently looking for either a single-story home or a home that has the primary bedroom on the first floor, so she has accessibility in the future. And she wants enough bedrooms to be able to have one for a dedicated home office and another for a gym.
A larger home might mean more living space and more room to entertain, but it can also mean a lot of house to maintain. How should people approach that?
Before purchasing, older adults really need to consider how much maintenance they're willing to do in retirement, and they need to be honest with themselves. Generally, the larger the home, the more maintenance required. But buyers need to remember that things can change very quickly. You may start out planning to handle routine maintenance on your own, but if you have a health crisis, that could change things pretty quickly.
How do real estate professionals say that people should map out their plan financially if they're ready to move after the kids have moved out?
I spoke with a housing economist, and he explained to me that there's a rule of thumb that retirees should spend only 4% of their total retirement savings each year to make sure they don't run out of money in retirement. So he suggests that to avoid overpaying for a home, retirees should calculate that 4% number, add in Social Security payments and other cash flow, and that should cover your budget, including housing costs. From that number, you can then determine what you can afford to pay for housing and still have enough money set aside for the rest of your life.
We're talking about larger homes, but to be sure, small homes often require lots of maintenance too, right?
Absolutely. And today, even smaller homes can have lots of maintenance due to the technology and complicated systems being incorporated, whether that's smart home technology, solar panels, batteries, or pool systems.
So where else should people's focus be besides just the square footage and the overall size of the house?
Older adults should focus on function, not on square footage per se. Having a ton of extra space doesn't matter if you don't need it. You really need to sit down and determine what your needs are and what they'll be in the future, and then buy appropriately. For example, is your family going to come to visit frequently? How long will they stay? If they're planning to come for the summer with the grandkids, you're going to need extra bedrooms and baths and probably a place for toy storage. But if they're just planning to come for the occasional weekend, a fold-out couch in the living room might work. Do you still work? If so, you may want an extra bedroom for office space. The same goes for hobbies. Do you need a den for poker or mahjong? Some couples are even opting to have an additional master suite to use as a so-called snore room so they can sleep separately in peace. It's important that whatever your future needs, you need to try to predict them as accurately as possible so you don't face buyer's remorse after you move in.
A snore room. Wow, some people think of everything.
That's my next article.
So if someone is deciding to upsize, what sorts of questions should they be asking themselves before they start that process?
Well, really, the most important question that they need to do is to try and accurately predict what their future needs are going to be. Like I found out with the 63-year-old woman I interviewed from San Diego, she was living in a house that had met her needs when she first bought it, but now her lifestyle has changed. So you really need to sit down and figure, where am I going to be in 10 years? Where am I going to be in 20 years? What will my lifestyle be like?
That's WSJ contributor Robin Friedman. And that's it for your Money Briefing. This episode was produced by Ariana Osbrew, with supervising producer Melanie Roy. I'm J.R. Whalen for the Wall Street Journal. Thanks for listening.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Spectrum Business, made to work just like your small business. Fast, reliable internet, phone, and mobile services, made to keep up with demand and made to deliver on a small business budget. Discover more at spectrum.com/world.
You're listening to Shortwave from NPR.
Hey Shortwavers, Regina Barber here with special guest Darian Woods of NPR's Daily Economics Podcast, The Indicator for Planet Money. Hey Dar.
Hello Gina, thanks for the nickname.
You're welcome, you're welcome. So we brought you on the show because recently you've been reporting on a question that's intriguing and actually very pressing on both scientific and on an economic level. How can we feed the
Thank you for choosing McDonald's. May I begin your mobile today?
Yep, it is 5987.
5987.
Correct.
Okay. What can I get for you, hon?
I'll take a sausage McMuffin and a sausage burrito.
Sausage. Perfect. Did you want any sauce for your burrito, hon?
Mild, please.
Okay, anything else for you?
That's all.
The total's going to be $3 first window.
Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you, darling.
Thanks. was standing out there for a good hour or so. It's 36 degrees in Oxford. Trying to get public comment on these new routes we're proposing, and trying to catch students at the bus stops, the major bus stops. I find it easier to get their attention while they're waiting for the bus, but once they're, it's kind of hard to get their attention when they're moving and trying to get to class. So I'm hitting these major bus stops in the morning. I guess it's better than being rained on, so the cold wasn't too bad. Should be warming up later. Temperature's dropping though, it's windy and cold. Now it's 35 out. Now I'm trying to take a less congested way to Western Campus. Try to avoid all the pedestrian traffic. What the hell? This guy's parking in a stupid spot. Stupid. Clearly shows a yellow, but yeehaw, park in yellow. Once I'm on Western, I'll park at Bachelor Hall and head to Armstrong, pass out more surveys, and Now we're on Patterson Avenue. I'm going to take a right here at the Art Museum. Art Museum on the right. I think sadly, I don't think I've ever been in there. Like cute little bridge and lake or pond. Nobody's coming, so Western Lodge on the right. That's good for gatherings. Been there a couple times for during grad school. Then we got, I think this is a power plant or we got the amphitheater down in this ditch over here on the right. This is Boyd Hall. I think folks have told me it's haunted or something. Very old campus. I think this used to be a women's college only back in the day. And then it merged or something with Miami University. These dorms up ahead are pretty new, maybe 3 years old or something. leave this car, it's nice and warm. It's so windy out there. Sucks. Team player. Let's see. Ooh, I think I found a good spot. No, I think it's handicapped though. Yep. All right.
City first came when it was 82.
I'm a little annoyed. I was hoping to go straight to Kentucky from here, get some Hawaiian food, but I just got a text from our ITS vendor. They can't access the internet on the bus. We don't have IT on staff, so I'm kinda IT. I kinda fake it till you make it a little. Or I guess I could actually do the job. I don't have all the one, I don't have the jargon, and two, this IT vendor holds all the credentials or login credentials, so I can't see anything or do anything about these issues. So I gotta run back to HQ, play telephone between IT and this ITS vendor, as they don't get along. And I have to go to HQ because there's no one else that's gonna do this. And if I don't do this, then the whole project's just waiting. Sometimes I wish I had a clone. Deep breaths. Deep breaths. It's fine. I guess I really don't like having to change my schedule. Maybe I'm getting old or something. I told this Hawaiian restaurant in Kentucky, I'm gonna try to show up, 4:30. But having to do this now is, puts a wrench in it. Now I gotta. So I texted them, save me a seat or save me a meal, and I'll be there dinner time instead. And the crappy part of going that late, I'm gonna get all that Cincinnati traffic, all that Covington traffic, and then the night crowd's gonna be out in the town.
I would do it a million times over again.
All right, so what stood out to you about what people like Elizabeth Golden and others were sharing today at the Capitol?
That they really want the opportunity to expand their families, and IVF is a way to do that. And they came together for this rally. There were so many more people there than I was expecting. And I would describe the mood as maybe a little bit angry, a little bit confused about why Alabama is suddenly on the forefront of this issue. And I had a chance to talk with patients, and they told stories about babies who would not have been born without IVF, and the babies were there.
What was the size of the crowd, by the way?
I would say a few hundred.
All right. Well, it seems like both Republicans and Democrats are listening to people in Alabama because there are two bills that would protect IVF providers in the state from prosecution for wrongful death of an embryo created through IVF. Now, the Republican bills don't include any language that would address whether an embryo is an unborn child. The Democrats' proposal does address that big question, saying that embryos are not human lives. What's the prospects that one of those goes to the governor's desk and becomes law?
Well, both Democrats and Republicans are pushing these versions of the bills, worded slightly differently. They're being promoted at the State House right now. Keep in mind, Super Tuesday is coming up, and Alabama voters will be voting on Tuesday, March 5th. So I think both sides want to be known as the party that came forward to support IVF in Alabama.
So you think something will get to the governor's desk and that she'll sign it? Kay Ivey will sign it?
Kay Ivey has already said that she is in favor of IVF continuing in Alabama. I'm not sure how quickly the bills can get through. They're worded a little bit differently. When I was asking about that at the rally, I was surprised that people, when I asked which version they preferred, most people said neither one. That they're confused about why there even needs to be a bill when IVF has been going on in Alabama and every other state for more than 40 years now.
All right, Ann Kenda, a reporter for Troy Public Radio, speaking with us from Montgomery, Alabama. Thank you very much, Ann.
Thank you, Peter.
It's Here and Now.
Living in the aftermath of climate-driven disasters is incredibly difficult for most Americans. But dealing with a disaster on top of the financial strain of being in college is even harder.
I couldn't sleep very well. I was not doing very well in classes. And then every time it rained, I just had a freak out.
Here are the unique challenges for college students in the face of climate change on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Starting at 4 o'clock on 91.7 WVXU. Just ahead, Argentina was having problems with runaway inflation, so they elected a new president who promised to make things worse. Coming up on Today Explained, going to Buenos Aires for a lesson in shock therapy. That's at 3:33 on 91.7 WVXU and 88.5 WMUB.
Support for 91.7 WVXU comes from Cincinnati World Cinema, presenting the Oscar-nominated short films at the Garfield Theater, weekends now through March 9th. Learn more about the documentary, animation, and live-action programs at cincyworldcinema.org.
We're trying to raise $32,000 before 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. What happens if we don't make our goal? We will not fundraise for the rest of the day, I can tell you that. We still need to raise the money, though. You can help. Call now, 513-419-7155, or give at WVXU.org.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston and BetterHelp, committed to supporting mental health through therapy. Clients are matched with one of 25,000 therapists and can communicate via video, chat, or phone at betterhelp.com/public.
It's Here and Now. We're getting a better picture of how effective the 4-day work week is. Companies have been experimenting with it and say their workers are happier. They report lower turnover and greater efficiency. NPR's Andrea Hsu shares the latest research coming out of those trials.
Around this time last year, early results from a large trial in the UK caused a hullabaloo. Of 61 companies that had moved to a 4-day work week with no reduction in pay, 92% said they would continue with it. Now another whole year has passed, and all but a few have either made it permanent or extended their trials. Boston College sociologist Juliet Shore is part of the research team.
People are feeling really on top of their work with this new model.
She says the gains are not a novelty effect, and they're not limited to the UK. Survey data from elsewhere, including here in the US, show lasting improvements in things like physical and mental health and work-life balance.
The results are really stable.
A couple of the UK employers talked about their experiences in a webinar hosted by the researchers. Nikki Russell, who leads a water conservation nonprofit in London, says she realized early on,
you know, if we close on a Friday, nobody dies, we aren't doctors, we're not running a chip shop.
Still, they were busy. So, to make it work, they now keep all their meetings to half an hour. They block off focus time in their calendars. They're more mindful about email.
So I only do my emails now at certain times of the day. I'm not sort of drawn into them all day, every day.
All 10 people at the company love the changes. Most of them said they wouldn't consider a 5-day-a-week job again without a significant raise.
It's brilliant for retention, which is super important in a teeny organisation like ours.
Now, one thing the researchers have learned is that there's no one-size-fits-all. Giving everyone Fridays off wouldn't have worked for the housing cooperative in South Wales, where Ruth Llewellyn works. They have 240 employees working in roles from customer service to home repairs and maintenance.
We still operate a Monday to Friday service because for us, the thought of dropping a repairs service for our tenants 1 day a week meant that we wouldn't be providing the same service.
So employees work a variety of schedules. Some have a set day off, and for others it changes.
We've also got people that do 2 half days, people that do 5 days, shorter hours, which allows them to do things like drop the children at school and pick them up.
Llewellyn says there are fewer sick day call-outs, and employee performance has been consistent. Still, they want to collect more data, so they extended their pilot for another year.
We're really hopeful at that point that we can make it permanent.
Now, the researchers did talk about one of the very few companies where the experiment failed. A small consultancy struggled with managing client and stakeholder expectations. Although employees were happier, management had a change of heart. The researchers suggest that better planning and more flexibility might have changed that outcome. Andrea Hsu, NPR News.
When the name Billy D. Williams comes up, those of us of a certain vintage immediately think Lando Calrissian, the smooth-talking charmer from the Star Wars sequel, The Empire Strikes Back, 1980.
What are you doing here?
Repairs. I thought you could help me out.
What have you done to my ship?
Your ship? Hey, remember, you lost her to me fair and square.
And how you doing, Chewbacca? Still hanging around with this loser?
Hello, what have we here?
Welcome, I'm Lando Calrissian. I'm the administrator of this facility. And who might you be?
Leia.
Welcome, Leia.
What Have We Here is also the title of Billy D. Williams' new memoir. It tracks his nearly 8 decades in theater and film and television with a couple surprises. Did you know Billy D. Williams began as an artist? Grew up on 110th Street in Harlem? In fact, the head of his academy told his mom, "Don't let Billy become an actor. He's a painter." I spoke to Billy D. Williams recently about his memoir, and I asked if he ever had doubts about acting.
No. I was a kid. You know, I remember when I was very young, I read a book by J.D. Salinger called The Cats Were in the Rye.
Yeah.
And I always related to that character. You know, I was one of those kind of kids who kind of had an innocence, a adventurous spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was all a wonderful, incredible journey.
A key moment for you is when you get your first big break in 1971. You're cast in the television movie Brian's Song. It was based on, of course, a real-life story of 2 teammates on the Chicago Bears football team, Gale Sayers, Brian Piccolo in the 1960s. Sayers, the player, was black, Piccolo was white, and he's diagnosed with cancer. And we're going to hear from a scene as you, playing Gale Sayers, accepts an award for courage, but then you use the moment to praise your teammate. Here it is.
I'd like to say a few words about a guy I know, a friend of mine. His name is Brian Bigelow. And he has the heart of a giant. And a rare form of courage which allows him to kill himself and his opponent. Cancer. He has a mental attitude which makes me proud to have a friend who spells out courage 24 hours a day, every day of his life.
Well, at that particular time, my father was dying from cancer in New York. He was at Mount Sinai Hospital, dying from leukemia.
Yeah. Did that part at the time, then, given what your father was going through, did the part come naturally to you?
Oh, yeah, well, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was very real.
You say throughout the book that you didn't want to be seen as a black actor. That
All right, fantastic news. I was able to fix the problem remotely, connected, or I had IT check on the settings, and they fixed it. And the vendor confirmed that it's working. So there's no need for me to go to headquarters. I can go straight to Kentucky. Using Google Maps. I don't really know this area too well, so yeah, I'm not an expert through here. I'm looking at Google. a nice area. Can't see anything. Ross Township. Oh boy. Oh. Should be in Kentucky in about 30 minutes. I'm gonna order a Loco Moco small and maybe some ahi poke and today's special, the Lao Lao. Probably going to be about almost 40 bucks in food. Oh, but it sounds so good.
The government freezes people's bank account. People cannot take their own money out of the bank.
They turn what was, at the beginning, deposits in US dollars to deposits in Argentina's pesos, not respecting the original equivalence between the two currencies.
Eventually, people are allowed to access their savings again, but by that point, their pesos have lost half their value.
One of the headlines Washingtonians are waking up to this morning from the Washington Times: Argentina beyond the brink. Argentina is in a free fall. Its economy is shattered. It can't pay its huge debts at home or abroad. Its political leaders are befuddled and desperate. Military leaders are grumbling. There's looting, rioting, and death in the streets, and nobody sees the end of it yet.
I try to imagine Joe Biden confiscating savings accounts. Give me January 666 out in D.C.
Would never happen. We hope, but in Argentina, you're talking about things that happened in the 1980s, long before I was born, in the 1990s, in the 2000s, still a long time ago. What's been going on more recently?
Well, Noel, do you remember the global COVID-19 pandemic?
I do very well, yeah.
It was rough everywhere, as you'll recall, but it was extra rough in Argentina because they didn't just have pandemic-related inflation. They were going into the pandemic with inflation.
Inflation was already around 45% a year in 2019. So when the pandemic hit and all these inflation-related problems started to be a concern everywhere else, in Argentina we already had a quite serious problem with inflation. So the situation, of course, got worse.
And actually, during the pandemic, when everyone was just sitting around watching TV with nothing to do, there was this guy with a funny haircut and huge sideburns who would show up on all the talk shows talking mad smack about the leftist government and its policies and how everyone was corrupt and needed to be chased out of office. And guess who it was, Noelle?
What's his name?
Javier Milei.
They are desperate. They are losing the cultural battle. The lefties are cornered for the first time. The lefties are cornered.
Milei got on the TV and said, look at what these corrupting lefty governments have wrought. Their policies are bunk. Their economies are bunk. And fast forward to December 2023, he becomes the president in a runoff election.
Mr. Milei, known as El Loco or Madman, pulled off a major upset. Provisional results show the self-styled anarcho-capitalist won with 55.7% of the vote, compared to 44% for his rival.
Voters were so cynical about politicians' ability to deal with inflation that they were willing to try this far-right, anarcho-capitalist, tantric sex teacher.
Who got elected not because he's great and bad, he might be, but he got elected because he was like, I can fix the economy, I've got a program here. You're down there, are you seeing any evidence that Milei's program is working?
You know, it's early, but he has had a few small wins already. The country has more cash on hand, and it's got a little less debt. But as far as how people are responding, a lot of people say he's still in his honeymoon phase. He entered office in December, and then people immediately went on vacation. It was Christmas, it was New Year's, it was just Carnival. Kids are only now going back to school, and parents are just getting back to business in Argentina. So it's in March that people think we might see how the country really responds to how hard a hit they're taking economically, and we'll see where it goes from there.
I mean, it's tempting to think we might find something instructive here. Inflation is on the top of everybody's mind in the United States. But you're talking about a country that has experienced in our lifetime 3,000% inflation. Argentina seems to just be Argentina, which is not to discount or give up on Argentina, but there's not like a lesson here, is there?
I think there is, yeah, courtesy of my sociologist, Mariana Luzzi.
One of the things that is very important is to not consider inflation as the only problem. One of the problems with inflation is that it keeps all the attention, it gets all the attention. It appears to be as the main feature we have to attack, as the only problem, as the only concern we should have. And what Argentina's history tells us is that you can solve the problem of inflation and still have very heavy economic problems.
Argentina's got plenty of other problems beyond inflation. They've got government debt coming out of their ears. They've got government spending problems that Milei's trying to address. Milei wants to deal with all of this stuff, but at this point, it doesn't seem like he's terribly capable of building coalitions in Congress to do it. He doesn't have experience. He's antagonizing. He's learning on the job, and he's still got a lot of learning to do. But one thing that's working in his favor is that Argentina has kind of seen it all.
Here, nothing makes sense. Everything is like a lottery. It's fun sometimes because sometimes you win the lottery, but in general, you lose.
No? This is Marcelo again from the grocery store with no prices. Even after everything his country's been through, he has faith in his government. He has faith in its institutions.
We have to be patient and wait. Anyways, we made our choice democratically. This is the system of government we have. We chose a president so that during his term he would lead the country, and we have to respect that. We will have the opportunity to vote again and show whether he did good or bad.
It was kind of incredible to me that this dude who runs a grocery store with no prices on display, where prices are doubling month to month, was advocating for patience, that he still had time for patience.
So as Americans go to the polls in November and are thinking about inflation and debt and spending and a paralyzed Congress, and potentially a leader that only half of us really want. Do you think we should remember Marcelo and Argentina?
I think so. I mean, I was constantly comparing everything I was hearing and seeing in Argentina to what we've got in the United States, not just because Milei is making all this noise, but because, 8% inflation in 2022 was pretty shocking for a lot of Americans, and I don't want to knock that response. It was comparatively bad for us, but when you compare it to what the rest of the world went through, what the rest of the world is still going through, it's not that bad. And then you look at how the United States has rebounded. Most countries would love to be in the state the United States is in right now. So it's going to be interesting to see how much inflation influences voters in November versus how much they'll think about everything else, because just like in Argentina, just like most anywhere in the world, there is a lot more on the line.
Today Explains Sean Ramaswamy. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Noel.
Sean Ramaswamy reported today's show. Miles Bryan produced, Matthew Collette edited, Rob Byers mixed with David Herman, who also remixed. Maura Bullard and Jesse Alejandro Cacho fact-checked. And Sean, you have some people to thank.
Ana Lankes, Amanda Aronchik, Lucia Chalakian Herrera, and Facundo Iglesia. And Mariana Luzzi's got a book called The Dollar, How the U.S. Dollar Became a Popular Currency in Argentina. There's also, of course, the original Spanish version, El Polar. Might be especially worth reading considering another one of Milei's plans to dollarize Argentina's economy.
Ooh, I'm Noel King. It's Today Explained.
WVXU goes wherever you do. Listen to 91.7 online at iHeartRadio.com and on your mobile device through the iHeartRadio app.
This week on Looking Up, I talk with author, YouTube host, student, and astronomer John Reed. They had this tiny telescope for $13.99. We talk about our fascination with the stars and becoming an author. I knew that astronomy was going to be a big part of my life. You can find Looking Up on all of your favorite podcast sites, or you can listen online at wvxu.org.
Business news. It's not all facts, budgets, and bottom lines. In the marketplace, it can be lots of things, like...
So, maybe you've heard of the Kardashians, iPhone and iPad app, Christian Dior.
Wine.
We fit Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
The NFL.
I'm Kyle Grisdall. Whether you need news or the numbers or just a good laugh, join us next time for Marketplace, the business show for the rest of us. It's from 8 p.m. American Public Media.
Marketplace starts this evening at 6:30 on 91.7 WVXU. Northbound 7175 on the ramp from 275. There is a broken down vehicle. It's sitting on the right shoulder on the ramp. There's a wreck on Woodford Road at Robinson Road. All Things Considered is next.
91.7 WVXU Cincinnati and 88.5 WMUP Oxford. News from Cincinnati Public Radio and NPR.
And the House Speaker cut a deal to avoid a government shutdown again.
He has the slimmest majority, and members of both parties mistrust him, but if he fails, the whole country could suffer.
It's Wednesday, February 28th, and this is All Things Considered from NPR News. Shapiro.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. This hour, big news in Congress that is not related to the shutdown deadline.
Mitch McConnell says he's giving up his role as leader of the Senate Republicans, though he'll stay in office through the end of his term.
I still had enough gas in my tank to thoroughly disappoint my critics, and I intend to do so with all the enthusiasm which they've requested.
Plus, a mission to save a famous glass chapel on the California coastline.
It almost looks like that just kind of sprouted there on its own, but it's very clearly something that was intentional, designed, and created.
First, the newscast.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The U.S. House is back from recess to again address the threat of a partial government shutdown. Speaker Mike Johnson told Capitol Hill reporters that he'll make decisions this afternoon about funding federal agencies. The first of 2 deadlines to approve funding is this Friday. In the Senate, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer describes what's at stake.
In a shutdown, costs would go up, safety would go down, and the American people would pay the price.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says he will step down as the Republican leader in November. NPR's Deirdre Walsh reports that will mark the end of McConnell's tenure as the longest-serving Senate leader from either party.
Senator McConnell said his decision to conclude his time as leader after the election comes after a tough year for him and his family. He's struggled with his own health issues. He's frozen publicly twice and suffered a concussion from a fall last year. He recently turned 82 and says this was the day he had clarity about what he called the sunset of his work.
One of life's most underappreciated talents is to know when it's time to move on to life's next chapter.
McConnell will remain in the Senate to serve out the rest of his term, which ends in 2026. Deirdre Walsh, NPR News, the Capitol.
President Biden has undergone a routine checkup. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says the president's annual physical exam at Walter Reed Medical Center today did not include a cognitive test because she says the president's doctor concluded that he did not need one. Many voters have raised concerns about the 81-year-old's memory and recall abilities as he seeks 4 more years in office. Similar concerns have also been raised about former President Donald Trump's candidacy at the age of 77. Troubled planemaker Boeing has 90 days now to come up with a plan to fix its quality control problems. NPR's Joel Rose reports regulators at the Federal Aviation Administration announced that deadline today.
FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker says Boeing must commit to, quote, real and profound improvements, unquote, and pledged that regulators would hold the company's leaders accountable. The 90-day deadline was announced after Whitaker met Tuesday with Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun and other top company officials at FAA headquarters in Washington. The agency is completing an audit of assembly lines at Boeing's factory near Seattle, where the company builds its 737 MAX jets. Quality control problems at Boeing and its suppliers came to light after a fuselage panel blew off the 737 MAX 9 jet in midair last month. Joel Rose, NPR News, Washington.
U.S. stocks have ended the day lower, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average closing down 23 points to end the day at 38,949. This is NPR.
Support for NPR comes from the Public Welfare Foundation, committed to advancing a transformative approach to justice that is community-led, restorative, and racially just. Learn more at publicwelfare.org. And the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macbound.org.
Good afternoon. It's 4:04, 36 degrees in Cincinnati, 34 degrees in Dayton. This is 91.7 WVXU. I'm Bill Reinhardt. At least 4 tornadoes touched down in central Ohio this morning, causing damage to homes, trees, and an airport. The Ohio newsroom, WOSU's George Shilkoff reports no one was injured, but a lot of people have been picking up the debris left behind.
Emergency officials in Franklin, Madison, and Licking counties report damage to homes and other structures like the Madison County Airport. Debris was strewn around the airport from several collapsed hangars and wind-damaged buildings. Several roads in Jersey Township were closed due to fallen trees. One home in Hilliard collapsed into another on West Reese Drive, dropping the Zinn News car in the garage. News says it was not damaged.
First we heard the wind, and then it shook our house for like 5 seconds. Then we heard something hit some part of our house. I thought it was a window, but we would have heard glass broken.
Officials in 3 counties say no one has been reported injured from the storm system in central Ohio. For the Ohio Newsroom, I'm George Shilkoff.
A measure that would bring partisan politics to the Kentucky Board of Education has advanced in the state Senate. The committee approved Senate Bill 8 today. It would have voters elect state Board of Education members in partisan races. Currently, they're chosen by the governor and must include members of both major political parties. Sponsor, Senator Mike Wilson of Bowling Green, says board members are exerting too much control.
I think it's time that we made them accountable to the people that actually put their kids in our schools. And that is what this bill would do.
Some Republicans have opposed the board's support for policies that are inclusive of LGBTQ plus students. Opponents say SB 8 will bring more dysfunctional partisanship into public education. measure heads next to the Senate floor. FC Cincinnati hosts its first CONCACAF Champions Cup match tonight. They play Jamaican side Cavalier FC at TQL Stadium at 7 o'clock. An overnight low of 26. It's 36 degrees now.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell announced today he will step down from his position in November. We'll have more on his decision and his legacy later in the program.
First, March 1st is just hours away, and it's the first of two deadlines for a partial government shutdown. The second is March 8th. Lawmakers agreed on those dates in January when the country was, sound familiar, on the verge of another government shutdown. Since then, conditions for making a political deal have only gotten worse. The Republican majority in the House has shrunk to just 2 votes, and the path forward depends on Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana. NPR congressional reporter Eric McDaniel has been following these talks, and he's here in the studio. Hey, Eric.
Hey there.
How have the negotiations gone so far?
I mean, I think we could almost talk at this point as though they do have a short-term plan together on the funding bills, at least for the agencies that are going to run out on Friday. I think we'll see something to that effect soon enough, right? Because that's how these deadlines go. They still need to pass that hypothetical deal, and of course, I'm not a fortune teller, but I also don't expect a government shutdown on Friday, right? They'll cobble votes together and keep working on things for another short-term extension, or maybe even these quote-unquote full-year fiscal bills, even though that would be to just September of this year. Because I don't want to miss the forest for the trees here, right? They were supposed to pass these full-year spending authorizations for the federal government in September. You and I are sitting here talking, it's February 28th. So in that way, right, negotiations over the spending bills aren't going great.
No, but I do appreciate you're putting a positive spin on this. Remind us of what the fiscal parameters are that Speaker Johnson has to consider here.
So right now the U.S. government is still operating under budget choices that were made by a whole nother Congress, right? Just after the 2022 midterm elections, when Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, was still in charge. The new Congress hadn't taken office. She was serving as Speaker of the House. The current Congress has been extending that funding in small increments ever since. Johnson says he wants to stop these so-called stopgap measures and pass the full-year bills. But it's been impossible so far to get House Republicans and the rest of Congress on the same page about what should be in those bills. And that's kind of where we are now. And just to put a fine point on it, funding the government is a core job of Congress. It's the power of the purse. And there are some ways they haven't really done it in the way it's designed to work since 1996, 1997. And I think there are reasons now, and we can get more into this, that the problem is worse than it's ever been.
Yeah, well, let's get into one of those reasons. Johnson, who has not spent long as Speaker of the House, has spent most of that time trying to manage the far right of his own party, who generally don't support any kind of spending deal that Democrats could agree to. How has that dynamic created this moment we're in now?
It's really important. There's no way around it. And while Johnson might be trying to manage them, he's really not tried to appease them so far, right? In fact, he's sort of gone around them. He's now pushed through 2 short-term funding extensions against their wishes, despite promising when he was running for Speaker that he was done with short-term bills. But we could see another pass this week. He's advanced a bipartisan tax deal. For the most part, they did not back that. And in this context, deferring to his far-right members would be insisting that the big conservative policy riders on guns or abortion that President Biden would never sign, and maybe letting the government shut down. And there's just no sign that he's inclined to let that happen.
So he's not insisting on those conservative priorities right now?
I mean, I suspect any conservative wins we do see in a plan will be much smaller than the hardliners want to see. These big ones on abortion or guns, say, are described as poison pills by Democrats, things they just can't stomach. And because Biden is in charge of the White House and Democrats control the Senate, they're not going to go through. But the issue for Johnson is that these anti-compromise folks make up somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of his majority, depending on what the exact issue is. And they have some fundamentally different incentives. Part of Johnson's job as Speaker is to govern and make Republicans look electable and responsible and competent, but the anti-compromise folks represent districts that have been drawn to be so safe that compromise could doom them when they have to compete in the party primaries that are so rigorously partisan because of, the way these districts are.
Yeah, so if you look at this through the eyes of those hardliners, how are the considerations different?
Well, their job is to hold the line and excite their very engaged Republican primary voters. Remember, most of Congress is made up of these safe seats, where the party primary is the vote that matters, not the general election. There are just 20 or 30 seats that are totally competitive or designed to be competitive in the general election between the parties. these hardliners are just responding to the incentives that they have.
Lots of House speakers have had to navigate a shutdown fight, but none of them have had as little experience as Johnson. Do you see that having an impact on his ability to deliver a deal?
Weirdly, I don't. I don't think this is entirely an experience problem. I don't think his leadership skills really have much to do with the core issue here, right? He's just got a plain old problem. There's a philosophical divide that I'm not sure who can bridge it. We might see these deals come together eventually, but we're already late, right? And I also just wouldn't say, to your point, though, he's new, right? He's not a master tactician in the same way we've seen from Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell.
Outgoing Senate Republican leader.
Now.
Although in his short time as Speaker, Johnson has had some pretty public failures, like the first impeachment vote against Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas failed, the Israel solo aid package didn't go through. Are those things affecting his ability to bring members along?
Right. I mean, those bills failed back to back on the same night, right? And the second, the Mayorkas impeachment, because of Republican opposition. It wasn't a shining moment for the new speaker, and he's been a little wishy-washy when coming to final decisions. But ultimately, he was, of course, able to impeach DHS Secretary Mayorkas the following week.
You know, one of Johnson's predecessors was Democrat Nancy Pelosi of California, and she avoided a shutdown in 2022 by keeping her party together, even though there were intense dissents and fractures within that party. Does Johnson have the same level of credibility as Pelosi? Can he hold his party together?
I mean, there is no question, right? Pelosi was known for her ability to keep the whole party together on tough votes. That's absolutely true. We saw it way back during the Affordable Care Act fight. But partisan Democrats also have a different base to win over, right? Intransigence isn't the same winning message all the time that it is for some of these partisan Republicans. I think the predecessor who actually has the most to teach us about this moment is Kevin McCarthy, right? He's Johnson's immediate predecessor, Republican from California, and the former speaker was the one who essentially changed the rules last January to empower this anti-compromise flank in a way that they weren't before. They can now block key procedural steps because of their positions on the Rules Committee, and even fire the speaker if they disagreed with just a couple of members. And in this tiny majority, that's a big deal. That came home to roost for McCarthy when they ousted him in the fall.
Okay, we started by talking about how little time is left, and you said you're not a fortune teller. I want to end by asking if you're a bettor. What do you think's going to happen?
I am a bettor, and here's the bet I'll take. I think they're going to move the deadlines a couple weeks to get a broader deal through. That's my guess. There are 2 days to pass something and avoid a partial shutdown. That's not a lot of time, but it's also not impossible. But I want to say, again, even if they get an agreement, even on funding for the rest of the fiscal year, this isn't a sign that things are working well. The U.S. is the richest country in the world. It's styled by its leaders as a shining city on a hill. And here we are, where the whole federal government can't long-term plan because its agencies don't know how much money they'll have. This is a structural problem that got us here, and I just don't see that going anywhere.
NPR congressional reporter Eric McDaniel, thanks.
Thank you.
For the past two winners, Southern California has got...
Man, I haven't been on this road in forever. We're in Cincinnati. Trying to get over to Kentucky and start eating. I'm hungry. 5 minutes away. been on this bridge either. Wow. This is a way better route. At least this part of the day.